Today we're going to be answering an age-old question: which is the better Superman figure, the Beast Kingdom release or the DC Collectibles release of Superman from Batman v Superman? This challenge, if you will, came about from a few commenters who had posted on the original Beast Kingdom Superman video, mentioning that the far superior release of Superman came from the DC Collectibles DC Films. Well, that got me thinking, and I thought, well, why don't we have a look at both figures in this review to see who is the better Man of Steel. So in this video, there's no accessories, there's no display bases, we're just going right to having a look at the two figures side by side, head to head, and we're going to decide together who is the better Man of Steel. Why don't we first start by measuring off the figures. Now, we know that the Beast Kingdom is a lot taller. There's no denying that he's going to be a lot taller than the DC Films release of Superman. We'll just switch that over to inches. For the Superman release from Beast Kingdom, you're looking at 7.8 inches, or in centimeters, you're looking at just shy of 20 centimeters in height. Now, let's go ahead and switch over to the DC Films Superman, who, of course, like I said, is going to be a lot smaller. There we go. The DC Films release of Superman stands just short of 7 inches, or in centimeters, 17.6 centimeters in height. Now, like I said, there's going to be no comparing of accessories. This one had heat vision, for example, some interchangeable heads. This one had the kryptonite spear, for example. If you want the more in-depth review of both of these figures, you can feel free to check out the individual reviews that I've already done on both of them. But this is solely just looking at the individual Supermans per the suggestion of some of you viewers down there who may already be watching this video that had commented on the Beast Kingdom release of Superman, had said that the DC Films version was a much superior release. And I thought to myself, hey, wait a minute. And actually, it's funny enough, that sort of triggered my interest once again to try to scope out and find this guy. Because at the point of looking at the original Beast Kingdom release of Superman, I had not already had picked up this one. So that sort of kind of spurred my interest to eventually scope out and pick up this particular Superman. And then, of course, now we're going to have a look at them together. So why don't we start, obviously, with looking at the size difference between the two figures. We can clearly give it to the Beast Kingdom release of Superman because he is, of course, a lot taller. He's by about an inch taller than, I would say, this Superman here, clearly, as we saw with the measurements. Why don't we start with some negative points? Or actually, you know what? We'll start with the positives because there's really a few negatives, but there's not really a whole lot for them when it comes to the Beast Kingdom release. For the Beast Kingdom release of Superman, I have to say, in my honest opinion, he's got a better looking head sculpt. We'll compare him to the Superman from the DC film release. And I don't think it's necessarily a bad, here, I'll bring him a little bit closer, there we go. I don't think it's necessarily a bad likeness of Henry Cavill, but I do think, though, that this one might have the better head sculpt. Skin tone, I would definitely give it to the Beast Kingdom release as well. I'm not really sure why the DC Films version of Superman had to have such pale skin. It's also ever apparent as well on this particular release. I've got this little line smudge that's coming down the forehead, which I might have even mentioned at the time of that video. Here's the sides. This one again is a little bit more defined, and here is the front. It's interesting though that this Superman here has black eyes and black eyebrows. The one from DC Films has blue eyes and black eyebrows. Never actually even noticed it until I started looking at the comparing of the two, that this one doesn't even have blue eyes. I do think that the hair, though shinier, I like that it's a little fuller on this Superman than this one right here. This one definitely has a little bit more of a combed back presentation, whereas the DC Films, as you can see, is a little bit more messier. We'll talk a little bit about his, well, the two outfits, because the outfits are pretty much identical to one another. This one I think definitely has a little bit better coloring. The blues are a little bit more richer. This one has a little bit more of a, not faded, but a little bit more of a darker, slightly dingier blue, if you will. This one I think has a better color palette for his overall suit. Now the boots here, obviously on the Beast Kingdom one, is a little bit more defined. This one really needed some extra paint. You can see it was very messy and very dirty, and you almost needed like a second coat of paint. The Beast Kingdom, I think, has better boots than the one that from DC Films. But I think I like the coloring. It's a little bit more brighter. It's a little bit more vibrant on the DC Films version than on this one here. Although the opposite can be said, though, for the emblems. The emblems are a very stark contrast to one another. This one here also has the additional line that's going through the S, which Beast Kingdom, as you can see, has decided to leave it off entirely. This one's a little bit more screen accurate, but this one I feel has better coloring to it. It's a little bit more vibrant, almost as if you could have taken the color from this figure and moved it over here. I think that would be a better looking costume. The blues on the lighter metallic blues are both apparent on both figures. I think the metallic blue looks a little bit better on the Beast Kingdom release versus that of the DC Films. I feel like the coloring is slightly off on the DC Films version. One of the biggest, I think, obvious things that I would say the DC version does a lot better is the cape. Not only in the coloring, but also the length and obviously the material. Beast Kingdom, I'm still disappointed by the fact that they went with a very rigid, dense plastic. It almost feels like I'm picking up like a dinner plate. It doesn't really give you much in the way of what you can do with Superman, and I don't know if you've noticed it over the course of the reviews that I've looked at this guy a couple of times, but his torso always sort of bends forward, and his legs always sort of bend forward, and a lot of that can be chalked up to the fact that the cape just doesn't allow him to stand perfectly straight. I feel like I'm fighting with it so often to get him to stand perfectly straight because the cape keeps wanting to push him forward. Versus, let's just put him down here for example, versus this Superman here. This one you can probably, I think it's pretty unanimous to say that this is the better looking cape. Not only is the fabric a better, well obviously it's the fabric versus the plastic. The color is a little bit darker, it's a little bit more screen accurate. And I like the length. It's a very long, standing, flowing cape. This one also does have the wire frame. I think DC Films tops it and is better with the cape and the coloring of the costume. Let me just fix the legs right there. It must be something that Beast Kingdom realized after the fact, because it seems like all the other Superman after the fact all had cloth capes. You know, the superpowers, if you will, the SDCC release special editions, both the black costume and the comic colored costume, all used cloth capes. That's a lot of C's, instead of using this plastic cape. So it must have been something that they realized after the fact, not liking the direction that we went with using plastic, we really should have gone with fabric. And that's definitely something that I would say the DC Films does a lot better. Let's go through Poseability. Now this one here, we'll start with the smaller one. As we remember going through it, he did have the ball joint in the head, and then he also had a secondary ball joint at the base of the neck. So you actually got a little bit extra bang for your buck, if you will. He also had the full forward and back shoulder crunch, and then he had the biceps, the elbows, double hinge on the elbow, the hand, upper torso ball joint, lower torso ball joint, and really he also had the pop down legs, allowing you some extra mileage there. Swivel in the waist, or the thigh I should say, double hinge knee, and then of course a fair bit in the ankle. Although this one doesn't seem to have as much of the ankle rocker, but everything else on this guy seems to have it where it counts. When we had a look at this one, it's not quite the same thing. I think the shoulder crunch, the posability on the shoulders a little bit more than I like what this one here. This one did have a completely different approach in the fact that they had that socketed joint. So the joint allowed you to bring the arms out, or you could pop them back in. If you had them out though, you would notice a big gap, and also kind of gave you a very visible cup socket underneath, basically like the armpit area of Superman. Articulation was pretty much the same for the shoulders, the arms. Didn't quite have the double hinge on the elbow as this one had. And it also had the swivel in the wrist, same as that one. Upper torso ball joint, lower torso ball joint, pretty much the same as this one. And a very similar sort of fashion for articulation on the legs. Double hinge on the knee. And then this one has a much better ankle rocker, and it also benefited from having toe articulation. Like I said, we're not going to spend a whole lot of time focusing. Oh, and also, can't forget that this one also had the double ball joint head, same as that one right there. So when it really boils down to it, if we look at solely figure to figure, we can look at the benefits, the pros, the cons. The pros for this one, I think, has a better head sculpt and a better skin tone. I don't like, obviously, the cloth. I don't like the fact that he doesn't have the cloth cape, but he's also a little bit of a bigger figure, which may be eventually a deal breaker for you. You may like the fact that the DC Films is a slight smaller figure by contrast. But the pros on this one, again, good head sculpt, good skin tone, and I do think he's got a better emblem on his chest. The build, I think, is pretty good, but I would definitely say head, skin tone, emblem, and I think that would be probably it. The negatives, obviously, are the plastic cape being the big deal breaker. I find the coloring is a little on the darker, dingier side. It's about the only thing I would say is the two negatives is the cape and the coloring of the costume. I wish it was just a little bit brighter. By contrast, here we have the DC Films version, which I think has better coloring for his costume. I may say better posability, and of course the biggest asset, he has the cloth cape. The negatives, though, is the head sculpt I don't think is as good. The skin tone is too very bright, and I think that's about the only two negatives I would say is the head sculpt and the skin tone. It's almost like the opposite to this one right here. Personally speaking, I like this one from head to toe as a better built figure, but I like the head sculpt and the color scheme, at least on the head, a little bit better on the Beast Kingdom. I'm still gonna probably say, of my own honest opinion, at least looking at the two figures, I would have gone with this figure as the better Superman if I could simply have changed the head sculpt and given him a better skin tone. Because I really do like the cloth cape. The coloring is decent on the figure as well. There's a few little snafus, but I think this might be the better figure of the two. Even though I like the head sculpt better on this one, which could of course be the big decider for you. Head sculpt versus the rest of the figure. Let me know, though, down below, guys, what you think is the better Superman. Of course, there's other Supermans on the market as well, but solely looking at these two figures, because this was the big topic of debate. When I had a look at the Beast Kingdom release, a lot of people said, you know, that they felt this was the better release of Superman. And so I really wanted to put them head-to-head, Man of Steel versus Man of Steel, if you will, and see who was the better Man of Steel. Let me know down below, guys, what do you think is the better Superman of the two figures here? The Beast Kingdom release or the DC Collectibles DC Films release? Today we were doing a bit of a comparison, a battle, if you will. If you guys like to see more videos like this, let me know down below in the comments section. If you also haven't had a chance to hit that little subscribe button down below, what are you waiting for? More videos will be coming your way. Maybe we'll do some more kind of versus comparison videos if you guys, again, like this kind of video series. And certainly more videos will be coming your way as well. As always, guys, thanks for watching. I'll see you next time.